O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Although this bill does some very good things and will be supported by New Zealand First, it is far from perfect and it is incomplete. However, it's just enough and just in time for this year's local government elections. Clause 15 inserts a good news section requiring a candidate profile statement to include whether or not the candidate's principal place of residence is in the local government area in question. And that's a desirable provision because voters ought to have that information. But it does not preclude a candidate from living outside the area and does not preclude him or her stating what connections he or she has with the area. And of course, some people who do live within the area may in fact have very little genuine connection with it, so voters need to be aware of that too. Most important, however, Mr Chairman, are the provisions which are long needed concerning anonymous donations. And the need for those, of course, was well demonstrated by the John Banks issues in relation to his last unsuccessful Auckland mayoralty campaign. This is an important issue for transparency and democracy in local government. The bill addresses the matter which the John Banks electoral return from 2010 local body elections highlighted and revealed a gap in the existing legislation, allowing candidates to call donations anonymous, which they did or ought to have known were not, in fact, anonymous donations. New section 103F says, and I quote, "If any person involved in the administration of the affairs of a candidate in relation to his or her election campaign knows the identity of the donor of an anonymous donation exceeding $1,500, the person must disclose the identity of the donor to the candidate." Many New Zealanders will welcome that new provision. I worry a little that it will be necessary to prove actual knowledge, which may be difficult, and perhaps we ought to have added the words "or ought to have known" in the section as well. Nevertheless, it is a satisfactory section as it is, and it will help solve the bank's problem, or at least as far as legislation can go. Mr Chairman, the bill provides in section 103H that anonymous donations may not exceed $1,500 and that, and I quote, "If any anonymous donation exceeding $1,500 is received by a candidate in relation to an election campaign, the candidate must, within 20 working days of receiving the donation, pay to the electoral officer responsible for the conduct of the election to which the campaign relates the amount of the donation or its value less $1,500. And I think, Mr Chairman, that will also be a welcome provision to most New Zealanders. New section 103I provides for offences relating to contravention of section 103.8, quote, "A person who enters into an agreement, arrangement or understanding with any other person that has the effect of circumventing section 103H1 or 2 commits an offence," and so on. And that's a very important provision as well. I also want to mention the new section 103A referred to in SOP 198, which is also supported by New Zealand First. This section applies to a donation other than an anonymous donation that is made up of or includes or is wholly or partly funded from one or more contributions. The donor must, at the time of making the donation, disclose the fact that it is funded from contributions and disclose the details around it. This, of course, only applies to contributions over $1,500, and New Zealand First will support that, but we would have preferred to see it apply to all donations, or at least be limited in the way that Holly Walker recommends in her SOP, which New Zealand First will also support. Mr Chairman, the bill also provides for postponement of a local election, and Eugenie Sage has just spoken about that, so that in the case of a natural disaster or an emergency there can be an order in Council for postponement up to 6 weeks at the discretion of the Minister. But I note that subsection 6 says, quote, before recommending the making of the order in council, the Minister A must be satisfied on reasonable grounds that the order is necessary, and so on, Mr Chairman.
Mr
Chairman. Thank you. And B, must have consulted every local authority and electoral officer that will be affected. I think that subsection 6 does sufficiently limit the Minister's discretion about postponement, and that this would preclude the ECAN situation which many of us are so concerned about. So New Zealand First could not support SOP 201 or 215 in the name of Eugenie Sage. SOP 201 gives postponement power to an electoral officer, and we think that would be an excessive power to be administered by an official. SOP 215 requires the agreement of local authorities in addition to consultation, and New Zealand First feels that that would be excessive and unnecessary and would unnecessarily limit the overall thrust of the section. However, Mr Chairman, there is one very serious defect in the bill by omission. As I've said, the bill does need to do more than it does. The bill which we see now does not cover third-party donations and expenditure, and we in New Zealand First think it does. It's a potential gap for third-party campaigners to receive donations and use funds to promote a candidate without the candidate's permission, and appropriate regulation should be necessary for that. We accept that it's a complex policy area, and one which perhaps we don't have time to deal with in this legislation. It is one which New Zealand First wants to see in future legislation on these matters. Mr Chairman, overall the bill is a good one and does deserve support, but we think it is still a work in progress in the way which I have described. So for that reason, Mr Chairman, New Zealand First will be happy to support the bill, and we hope that other parties in the House will all do the same.
Mr Chairman.
Dr Cam Calder.
I move that the question be now put.
Phil Twyford.
Mr Chairman. Thank you, Mr Chairman. I want to talk to my supplementary order paper, which is on the table, sir, and it proposes an amendment to the bill that would change the formula for determining the campaign spending limits, and sir, it would have a very specific effect only for Auckland, for the Auckland mayoralty. It would have the effect of reducing the campaign spending limit, which is currently would currently be at about 5